Hello all and welcome to the Delphi Economic Forum that this year becomes 10 years old, and personally I hope that we will be here for many years more to discuss very important issues. In this discussion with our distinguished guests, we will try to explain the current crisis that Europe is going through. We will try to identify the crisis, first of all, that is caused by multiple situations inside and outside Europe. So let's begin by presenting our speakers here today. We have Slawomir Sierakowski, I hope I'm pronouncing it well. Perfect. President of the Program Board in ImpactCEE from Poland. Ana Palacio, former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Spain from 2002 to 2004. And Thomas Mayr-Harting, Chair of the International Advisory Board of the European Forum Alpbach from Austria. Thank you all for joining us here today. The European Union has been constructing a building the last years, the last decades, but lately it seems that the very foundations of this building are not solid enough. We have seen division, hesitation, unwillingness from the member states to move forward. And if you add the very well-known Brussels bureaucracy to all of that, the situation can seem disappointing. But is it though, or is it a period of transition? Before going into the discussion, I would like to give to all of you some time to explain to us your opinion about which is the kind of crisis that we're going through right now. Is it a crisis of confidence? Is it a crisis of values? Is it a crisis of strategy? All of it combined? And how did we end up here? Ms. Palacio, please.
Well, if you ask me to summarize in one sentence, it's a crisis of rule of law. Because in the end, bureaucracy is rationality. I mean, I have a quote from Alice Weidel, and Alice Weidel is AFD, so it's populism. And she says, we don't need all these bureaucrats who have no clue of what they are doing and destroying our foundation in the European Union. Well, I don't agree. I don't think this is right. I think that we can go back to the war between the Olympic gods and the giants, the sons of Gaia. And it was the same. It's order versus disorder. It's rationality against emotionality or power or whatever. Why, just being in Delphi, it's a must to mention this background, but I think that we can also quote Woodrow Wilson. Administration lies outside the proper sphere of politics. Administrative questions are not political questions. I mean, administration, so les fonctionnaires, the officials, are supposed to stand by the general interest, by the public interest. And we are seeing in the United States how these new president and administration are going against that. Again, why do I mention that this is rationality? Because the core of this is Max Weber. How is, just I have the quote, Max Weber, rational legitimacy. You remember rational, traditional, charismatic. And we are the sons of that. And the European Union is that. It's rational, resting on a belief in the legality of enacted rules and the right of those elevated to authority under such rules to issue commands. So what we are seeing, frankly, I mean, I don't agree with this idea that bureaucrats know nothing in the European Union. It's absolutely not. And again, in terms of figures, the European Union, all institutions, everybody that works there, 60,000 people. The Paris mayor, 50,000 people. Madrid mayor, 40,000 people. I mean, come on. We blame the bureaucrats. We have to search in ourselves. What is the crisis that we are having right now is that, and with this I finish, the European Union is the fantastic combination of politicians that dare And if you see La Déclaration Schuman in 1950, you see how it was daring to do an institution, to create bureaucrats, to just solve to guarantee peace between Germany and France, because this is what coal and steel was about. So, politicians that dared, plus the functional legitimacy of what has been built, which in the end, and we could discuss this at length, the European Union is the best achieved example of the paradigm that was born after World War II with all the institutions that were created. And the paradigm is peace is the objective, prosperity is the means, rational exchange is the tool. And this is what we have forgotten. We don't have the daring of the politicians, and we blame on the bureaucrats. This is my first take.
Thomas,
and I
please.
mostly kept on time.
and of course, we should say that the criticism to the bureaucrats is not that they don't know anything, is that they're very slow in their decisions. Anyway, we're going to discuss about all this. Thomas, which is the crisis that we're facing right now?
Well, I mean, clearly the crisis that we're facing has been accruing. We've gone through a series of crises over the last decades. We started with the economic and financial crisis that was felt particularly hardly in this country. We had COVID, we had the migration crisis, and now we have this overall encompassing security crisis, which involves, on the one hand, the aggression of Russia against Ukraine, and on the other hand, big doubts about the future of the transatlantic relationship. So obviously, this is a major multifaceted crisis that we've never faced in this kind of multifaceted way before. And clearly, even in a more minor crisis than the one that we're facing now, the key issue is always the issue of trust between the population and those who govern that population. So the real question is, and this is of course linked to your theme on populists and bureaucrats, etc., are we facing a crisis of trust right now? And when we discuss this, we will have to look at which part of the crisis, trust crisis, which I think we have, is homemade, and which is the element of external factors. And that is something we will clearly have to look at more closely. I mean, if you look at the old discussion about Europe and European bureaucrats, I agree entirely with the minister that the numbers are, of course, somewhere else, and the whole situation is different, and we've been facing for many decades the problem that member states in the European Union have had the tendency to nationalize successes and Europeanize problems. And whenever something happens, and when they agree to something in Brussels, they come back home and say, it's not our fault, it was decided by Brussels, although the national ministers are part of that decision-making process. So clearly, we have that issue there as well. And when it comes, to populism, we'll discuss that. The basis of populism are real problems in many cases. Populists magnify problems. Populists sometimes invent problems, but in many cases, these are real-time concerns real-time concerns of the population that populists are more successful in exploiting than the governing. And when it comes, to the one final comment about the Brussels bureaucracy, if you want to call it that, because this is a remark I already made earlier on today. In all these crises we're facing in the last weeks, the last one, and a very dramatic one, was the crisis on trade and the crisis on tariffs. And obviously, while the biggest response to what was happening in Washington came from the market, there was also a measured and I think clever and wise response that came from the European institutions. And the strange thing is that the institutions that came up with that response are the oldest institutions in the European Union, because that's the whole thing the integration process started with trade and commerce. And it's the most integrated field of our cooperation, where in fact the major decisions are taken by Brussels institutions. And if you look at the way it evolved, the wisest reaction to some of the crises came right now, came from the most integrated structures we have in the European Union.
Slawomir, please.
Yeah, sorry, I just came from Washington, so and I'm one of these victims of the strike at the airport. So my condition is similar to American democracy condition. So like 2 points. One is that the politics became very personalized, which is a symptom of the crisis of confidence. I observed how everybody's chasing Republicans now, and one of the consequences of populism that I really know well from 8 years of Polish populism is that the parliament becomes irrelevant. So you talk to Republican senators, congressmen, and they are same confused because 5 people are deciding about everything now. This was exactly the same how was everything in Polish Hill, let's put it this way, which is not good, and it's clearly not very democratic, and it's clearly killing any trust between people, because politicians are capricious, and these politicians are the most capricious that you can imagine, which actually is also a chance, because they will argue, they will quarrel. I give them 1 month, 2 months, and they will all hate each other. But I'm a sociologist, so let me give you another angle from the bottom. The main factor that led Poland to populism was the crisis of trust, but in a different sense. The crisis of trust among people to each other and people to institutions. In Poland, it comes from the historical factors. Sociologists measure trust in a very simple way. They ask people like whether it makes sense to trust others or it's better to control situation. And in Eastern Europe, around 20% would tell you that, people don't trust to each other. 70% of people don't trust to their closest family. So it tells you something. In Northern Europe, the numbers are much higher. In Western Europe, they are around 40%, but going down. What's the consequence? The consequence is that, to simplify, when you have 2 parties and one promises you reforms, like, full of experts, they measured everything, they have a project, they know how to invest to enhance the healthcare system, educational system, pension system, all is very rational and actually very efficient. But there is another party that promises you cash. If you don't trust to other people, if you don't trust to the state, you don't trust that the reform will be delivered. And also, you see other people as pathology, alcoholics, they don't work, they don't deserve any social programs. So people choose cash parties, and cash parties are populist parties. They offer you hate to the people or minority that they will point out, and they offer you cash. And by the way, if you get cash, that leads to dismantling of social system, because people then go to private doctors, they go and buy private lessons, which creates a hidden privatization of social systems, which is another consequence of populism that people don't talk about a lot. So what is to be done? What we can do and what we should do as people is to create islands of trust. And it's a role of NGOs, media, some leaders, some active people like Anna in their environments. And then usually, I don't see any other way than from the bottom to, it may sound as a long march to you, but if we won with populists in October 15th, year and a half ago, it's only because small groups joined. They created huge turnout at the elections, which was 75%, much higher than the turnout that we had when communism collapsed, which was 64%. So I would say that these guys are big, but the small ones, like regular people, have all the, I would say, real control, even if it's invisible. So this is why I'm trying to avoid the discussion about confidence among leaders, confidence among institutions, etc., etc. We should really go from the bottom.
So we have citizens with a lack of trust in European institutions and heavily criticizing the bureaucrats in Brussels
But
from
by the
one
way,
side.
one footnote. I mean, I think masks is our promotion agency for and every bureaucracy in the world, including European bureaucracy. What they are doing now, they're ruining, they are dismissing absolutely best people. EU should create 3 agencies and hire best people from CIA, FBI, to Pentagon, of course, and so on and so on. Like, I think it's going to be a good time for bureaucracy after people will see the consequences of what Musk and Doge is doing now.
So right now, though, in Europe, the European institutions seem to have lost the space that they need, and they have left a lot of space for populists that look very appealing because, as you said, they offer very easy solutions that are very simplistic as well. How do we cure that, though? Please,
But
Anna.
you know what? I fully agree with Slawomir. I think that what we have to ask ourselves is, what about the self-confidence of Europeans? Because the truth of the matter is that Europeans feel, and they have been feeling progressively, this, that the world is not the European world, is not even the Western world. And I think that there is again, it's for politicians. So this is the first thing. The second thing that I would like to respond, not that I don't want to respond to your question, but that is that the big challenges that the European Union is facing now, which is foreign projection and defense, frankly, they are outside the treaty. And I'm saying this under the control of Ambassador Domecq. Ambassador Domecq launched this European institutions effort for defense industry. But the truth of the matter is that there is no legal base. Now, there was no legal base when von der Leyen, during the COVID, took measures, and the European Council backed her, and we really went beyond the treaties. So when there is will, there is a way. And this is the story. I mean, starting from 1950, I think that this is important. Now, you say that the institutions, we always, as I say, there is a reflex to blame the institutions. I think that Slawomir can tell us how in Poland, through a perfectly democratic process, it was not hijacked as we see in some other places, or we fear in some other places, and I won't mention some of them very important, that maybe there is no way back. Bukele, for instance. Bukele has been re-elected, and let's see what happens. So let's not blame, I wouldn't say the messenger, but the bureaucrats. I think it's too easy. I think that the Europeans have to address this challenge, which is, do we really want a common defense? Because the Poles, they are spending 5% of their GDP, and they really are getting there. By the way, they say that they won't go to Ukraine. Maybe you can explain that. We in Spain, we are the laggards. I mean, how can I address a Pole and say, look to the south? If he will tell me, okay, you know what? I will look to the south when you fulfill your duties in defense. So right now, the big challenges of the European Union are outside the bureaucracy, are really part of the European Council, so that they get together. During the COVID, they got together, they backed Angela Merkel, well, not Angela Merkel, she was there, but not back. Ursula von der Leyen, and we got the vaccines, we froze what is the legal base, which is how we speak technically, the bureaucrats in Brussels, to freeze the deposits by the Bank of Russia. Man, there is no clear legal basis. So again, let's understand where we are, and let's accept this challenge. It's a different world. Let's play by this world without losing our values, our principles, and frankly, our rule of law approach.
But don't you think there's a big gap of communication from what you're saying and from what citizens really understand? I'm sure if we ask many citizens, they won't be able to understand, to know, they don't know all these things that you say the bureaucrats are doing.
Okay.
So it's not communicated properly in any case.
The European institutions, in particular the European Commission, do a poor job in communications, terrible job in communications. But again, I think that it's for the politicians. I fully agree with you, Mayor, that all the governments, and I plead guilty. When you are there, you have a responsibility. You tend to blame or to have your citizens understand that whatever is wrong is to be blamed on Europe, and then whatever is right is you, even if you have done this road partly with funds from the European Union, or if you have managed to do these investments thanks to the next generation funding. This is right, but I think that and on this I fully agree. I think that Poland is a place to look at how they have reacted. And one thing that you said en passant, which is how your public opinion has evolved, how in Spain it's something similar. I think that let's be realistic and not blame the bureaucracy. The bureaucracy is what we want the bureaucracy to be, citizens and politicians especially.
Thomas.
Well, I want to revert to this issue of populism, because I mean it's far older than the present crisis that we have. And I want to reiterate what I said. Populism doesn't come from nowhere. It doesn't come from a vacuum. It normally is nourished by real problems. And I mean, this is particularly obvious in our societies. The biggest driver for populism in my own country, my home country, Austria, at one point was migration, and uncontrolled migration, or insufficiently controlled migration. And political parties and populist parties play with this. And obviously, the issue is, to a very great extent, and therefore I think it is a shortcut to simply speak about bureaucrats. The real issue is how middle-of-the-road political parties, centrist parties, traditional parties react to this kind of problem. And if traditional parties don't find the right response to these problems, then it again feeds populist movements. And there's also a risk, because in some instances, traditional parties sort of use a radical type of language which is similar to the language that you experience from populists, and the result is not the one they expect, that they sort of get voters to move from these populist parties to the middle-of-the-road parties. It's rather the other way around, that with their own propaganda they nourish the field from which then populist parties draw again more increased support. And the other issue, which is an issue that one needs to look at right now, is of course the external influence in this factor. Because since we've had these populist movements, it is obvious that external actors, through means of hybrid action, disinformation, etc., are nourishing these trends. And we can see it very clearly in our own societies. I mean, the links between Russia, to say it as bluntly as that, and populist movements in Western Europe is so obvious that you don't even need to comment on it. I mean, just to remind you that President Putin decided to receive Mrs. Le Pen a few weeks ahead of the French presidential elections in 2017, and we all know about the financial links and the organizational links that exist in this field. And the more vulnerable societies, the bigger that influence is. And it's even stronger in our neighboring countries that are not yet in the European Union. And as if everybody here has an ambassador to draw upon, I can draw upon the ambassador of the Republic of Moldova, who's here today, because I worked on the Transnistrian issue over a certain period of time, and I sort of experienced how external influence is aimed at destabilization and is aimed at supporting at supporting populist movements. I mean, if you looked at the most recent developments, it's fascinating to see that the Russian Federation took the decision to let its own allies, if you want to call it that, in Transnistria freeze for quite a number of weeks, in the hope that this process destabilizes the neighbor in the rest of the Republic of Moldova. And if you look at these links between populism and external destabilization, I think that is an issue of particular concern. And then, of course, there's a third issue, and this is how you cope in our societies with populist parties if you let them accede to power or if you try to isolate them. And there, frankly, I mean, this is a subject which would justify a separate discussion. I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all solution for all countries in Europe. I mean, some countries have opted for a cordon sanitaire, other countries have not. And my own home countries, as the older participants in this room will remember, got into considerable trouble when it formed a government, including populists, in the year 2000. But my personal opinion is, I mean, the outcome was strange. In a certain way, we got the most pro-European government we had for a long time, perhaps also because of the pressure from outside. And if these people had not been included at the time, we would have had the problem that we now had 20 years later, probably 15 years earlier. Because one of the things you can always hope on, that is if you give a certain amount of responsibility to populists, they are so incompetent when it comes to exercising real power that then leads to a certain diminishing support for their position afterwards. But it's true, of course, it depends on the situation. And when my home country, Austria, was faced with the same problem this year, I mean, it was obvious that the populists had so radicalized that it was not possible to include them in any kind of governmental structure. But we've seen all sorts of models on this over time, and I think that finding the right response to populism is one of the biggest issues at hand, and it cannot be oversimplified by saying populists on the one hand and bureaucrats on the others. I mean, in reality, it's the responsibility of politics in general and parties in general and the political system to cope with this problem.
Slawomir, how do we solve the problem? And I insist how we bridge this communication gap that there is.
There was a American persecutor in Nuremberg. His name was Jackson. And when he came back to America, he had a problem in late 40s and 50s with some neo-Nazi movements in America, some very right-wing groups that became more and more influential because they were using this amendment to Constitution about freedom of speech. And then his reaction was like, I mean, if the law serves to the enemies of democracy, sometimes we have to be practical. Like, Constitution is not a suicidal pact, to quote him precisely. So I would, I mean, also using Polish example, I would go for some smart moves. Like, if everybody is chasing Republicans now, let's build relations with Democrats. They have time. They have, I mean, you won't do the same job and communication, by the way, with them when they're gonna rule. I mean, nowadays, a lot of them are looking for jobs. I mean, they will come back one day, okay? So like, okay, if people are now chasing Republicans, don't forget to build very good relations with Democrats, better than we had before. When Orban is blocking everything in the EU, using, again, rule of law, let's outsmart him, as we did once recently. Let's put him on offside. I mean, if we cannot move on unanimously, let's build a coalition of willing without Orban, okay? So I would rather go for some, like, to be more practical than we used to be in the EU now.
And very, very quickly, I would like to ask all of you if you think that if we have strong leadership right now in Europe to face all these challenges, the geopolitical and the economic, Anna, very fast, we have only 3.5 minutes.
Well, you know, look, I'm really concerned for center parties, because you are absolutely right that central parties should address immigration, should address security in the streets, which are what the people that vote for them are concerned, of the concern, a part of the concern. But if you say that if they address, they don't get votes, then it's harakiri for central parties. Then we have to imagine a different solution, and I really don't know what. I think that we are going through a transition period. We have to stand the course. We have to stand by rule of law. Central parties, and I belong to a central party, we have to be more realistic, as you said. I fully agree on this. But it's not that it will not happen. Again, I look at how Poland did it. And I fully agree, by the way, Slawomir, that we have to go forward with coalitions of the willing. Because, again, it's outside the treaty, so we can do that. Outside the treaty where the challenges are.
Thank you, Thomas. Do we have strong enough leadership right now in Europe to navigate us through the crisis?
Leadership?
Leadership in Brussels.
Well, I do think that leadership is a core issue, and that, I mean, obviously, the European Union has fared best when it has strong leaders both in the member states and in the European institutions. And we've even in the past, when Jean-Claude Juncker was president of the European Commission, we even engaged on the art of the deal, if you remember, in a different kind of trade situation. But clearly you have to be strong. And my personal, I mean, there's this famous statement by Monnet, who basically said that the only thing that lasts are institutions. And in reality, the strongest side that Europe has in this process is its institutional structure. And I can only repeat what I said earlier on, that it was most effective in the field in which it is most integrated. I mean, in the trade field, the European Union is and remains more successful because it has a method which works there better in some other areas. And I think clearly that we should try and build consensus within the Union and stronger decision-making structures also in other fields. I mean, the long issue of sort of majority voting in foreign relations issues and other things. I think it's worth discussing.
So to follow up one sentence, because I still have 50 seconds. I think three countries that usually were diverging in the critical moments, Poland, Germany, and France, now have a great occasion to merge, finally. There's this Hamiltonian moment in Europe. Poland cannot look only at the United States anymore, which is motivating Poland to look at European defense, European projects. Germany cannot be so pacifistic as before, which is also something new. And France cannot be that Gaullist as before, isolate itself, etc. So for the first time, we can have like three big countries, like Spain is doing economically so good enough. Meloni is a populist that we actually would like to have everywhere, at least in foreign policy. So I really believe that, I mean, every revolution is occasion to change, to move on, it's motivating. So, I mean, it's a European moment today, and let's just work.
I wish we had more time today with you, because European bureaucracy is an endless story for me. Thank you all for being here today.